On today's episode of Locked On Wild, the October schedule features a bunch of games on the road, which will test the Wild's playoff possibilities very early on.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day, and we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Zach Zeman joins us as we take a look at the October schedule, which features a couple of games at home to start, but then a long road trip that is going to put the old saying to the test. You can't make the playoffs in October, but you can certainly fall out of them. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, credentialed Wild media member, and host of the show since 2021, and joined by one of our regular contributors, Zach Zeman, who is here to help us gear up for the start of the season. Zach, after all of the offseason, all the preseason, the games are for real, and getting finally the regular season rolling and getting a chance to see everybody get back out there. I'm amped. I'm ready. I'm excited.
Yeah, hockey's back. I feel like we've been waiting for Thursday forever now. I mean, we missed the playoffs and, you do all that stuff and you just, the off season happens. All you want to do is get back to Thursday. And that's right on top of the schedule here. It feels like it was so far away, but now all of a sudden it's so close. It's been really fun seeing all the preseason action going on, getting the lineup going, seeing the players back on the ice, It's been great. And, October is a huge month for the Minnesota Wild. You get the start of the season, but you're also starting the season with a 3-week, 7-game road trip, which is just ridiculous. You welcome back, I guess. Thanks, Batman, for that scheduling. But here we are. It's good to be back, man. And here we go. What a great year. It'll be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. For those that didn't catch our schedule breakdowns last year, the format is that we're going to go game by game and kind of offer our thoughts, and we'll come up with an over-under total for where we think the Wild will be at. We're also going to talk about who will potentially be the Locked On Wild Player of the Month for October. And I guess at this point, just for my sanity, I'm hoping that the team gets off to a more even start than they did last year. You literally could not have started the season any better with the 2-0 shutout win against the Florida Panthers. And then right after that, it just completely fell apart. We got a night to enjoy the win. And I remember thinking after that game was done, Florida's a really good team, so it's not a surprise that that the Wild got peppered by the Panthers in that one. But then you follow that up with a loss to Toronto. You get mauled by the Los Angeles Kings. Columbus comes in and puts 59 shots on net in regulation. It went downhill very quickly. And in fact, Zach, in last year's month of October, the Wild had 3 wins. They beat Florida, they beat Montreal, and they beat Edmonton. But beyond that, they lost to Toronto, they lost to Los Angeles, Columbus in overtime, Philly, Washington in a shootout, and New Jersey. And so for the Wild this year, especially with the team trying to get back to the postseason this year, if you are going to be a playoff team, early start and a much better start than last year is going to be absolutely key.
Yeah, you're so right. Last year's October was a rude awakening for what this season was about to look like. And, all we can do when we're looking in October here is compare it to last year. And obviously it was not a good October last year. Now, my thoughts have changed. I am much more excited. I feel different about this team this year. We've been just basking in the last year's sadness, injuries, and all that. But, you never know what's going to happen. I think it's a really fun first game against Columbus here on Thursday. Hopefully a lot of you guys are going to it. I think I'll be there. Seth is going to be there. It's going to be fun. And, we open against Dean Evison, which is just a crazy storyline. Obviously, the former Wild coach comes back into town, and it's going to be insane. And, are we going to come in with 3 goalies this year? What is it going to look like? What is this team going to come out looking like against, Columbus, especially against the, Dean Evison? There's a lot of stories early on here that's going to be really interesting. Nevertheless, literally 3 weeks, 7 games road trip, which is just ridiculous on how to start it. I mean, all we can say right now is you have to start the season off on a good note. But when you're given that kind of road trip in October, it's going to be hard. And, adversity strikes early. It's going to be a really interesting, narrative for this team moving forward this year.
Yeah, it's going to test their mettle right off the bat. And you mentioned Columbus coming in. Obviously, they are going to be playing with heavy hearts this year after what happens to Johnny Gaudreau and his brother. The Dean Evison angle is there. It's a Columbus team that has lost 2 key pieces. Boone Jenner is one, and there was another player. The latest update is that those guys are going to be out of the lineup until sometime in the spring, which is at the beginning of the season. To be getting that sort of an injury update, not great.
That's the most hockey terminology for an injury ever. You get in the NFL, you get fined if you don't, disclose the exact date. The hockey, it's literally just, sometime in the spring. Yeah. And then it's just accepted.
That sounds like what somebody says when they are headed to a warmer climate to snowbird for the winter, and you ask them when they're coming back. Sometime in the spring. It's just completely vague. But I think it is a good reminder, if you take your eyes off the prize, or if you let your guard down, Columbus is still a team with a lot of young talent. They are fast, and the Wilds played them in that early game last year. They looked like they were running with cinder blocks tied to their feet because Columbus just was skating all over the place and getting whatever they wanted for shots. And so where this Minnesota Wild team is at, you can't take anybody lightly. And so even though it's a Columbus team that's coming in, with talent missing, you still got to go out and play your game. Otherwise, you're going to have a similar result as to what happened last season.
Yeah, I mean, you only get 2 home games this entire month. You have to make sure those count. You have to start the season off early on a high note. The Blue Jackets are that team to do that against, but also the Blue Jackets can turn on the Jets and really give you a show. So it's really going to be interesting on how, if the Wild start on their toes or heels. I'm hoping toes, obviously, man. It's going to be an insane start. I think this is one of the better matchups for the Wild in the month of October. You're starting the season home, but it's also against Columbus, which is a decent but rebuilding team, and I think that's a good one to start on. Get the motions going, get the line set, and if you can win those first 2 games at home, then man, you're setting yourself up really well for the road trip to come. Seattle just lost to the St. Louis Blues, who played earlier today when we were recording this episode. So there's a couple shaky games already there, and you can really take advantage of the teams, especially starting at home. And the first 2 games of the year, you got to start off right.
Seattle looked fantastic in the first period and a half of that game that you mentioned against Seattle or against St. Louis. They've started a new era with Dan Bilesma coming in as head coach. It sounds like they're going to be trying to play a little faster, with a little more speed. Amazing how so many teams that were playing kind of a let's slow it down and get really physical style. So many of those teams are no, we got to speed it up. But they it was like there was a switch that was flipped. Somebody in one of the back rooms of the arena was just going through and flipping the circuit breakers. and they hit the one that was the Seattle Kraken performance, because once that switch was flipped, they just were a mess, especially Philip Grubauer in net. Like 3 goals allowed in literally like 3 minutes. Like it just
2-goal lead, the worst one in hockey, man. And you got to hold on to it. You got to improve on it, and you can't let the Blues just run away, especially at home. There, that's a rough start to the year. You can't take that one for granted.
I think the big thing that I look at in those first 2 games of the season is that they are both goalies that are very beatable. You've got, I believe it's Elvis Merzlikins for the Columbus Blue Jackets. It'll either be Philip Grubauer or Joey Decord in net for the Kraken on Saturday. Very beatable goalies, and so this is an opportunity for the offense to get off to the right foot this season. But, it all comes. One of the big things for me last year, Zach, was there just were so many games by this Wild offense where it felt like they just didn't challenge the opposing goalies. I remember one of the games that Seattle had Martin Jones in net, and I was screaming in the pregame, test this guy. You can beat this goalie. You just have to get to the net, and they never did. So going to be really interested to see in these first couple of home games how the offense does, because as we're going to talk about here in the next segment, it's all on the road after that, and you don't even have a moment to breathe after the Seattle Kraken game, because then you get your first big test in the Central Division. And so those are the first 2 home games, the Blue Jackets and the Kraken. We'll talk about what lies ahead on the road as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wilds after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, it's college football season. The NFL is also underway. There are no shortage of opportunities for you to take advantage of great ticket deals by heading to Game Time. And Game Time makes the process so stress-free. It's more time for you to tailgate. It's more time for you to get to the arena early and get set up and check out the great seats that you'll grab on Game Time. Plus, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live games even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we got you covered pre and post for Thursday's opener, tomorrow's opener against the Columbus Blue Jackets. We'll have a pregame crossover with Jay from Locked On Blue Jackets. We will also be having a special pregame hit with Denny. We've got postcast for you. We got 3 things to recap the game for you. Find somebody that does it better. I dare you. Zach, let's look at what comes next for the Minnesota Wild here in October, because as we discussed after those first 2 home games, it's wheels up to Winnipeg and back-to-back Central Division clashes on the 13th and the 15th at Winnipeg and at St. Louis. So early Central Division tests after those first 2 quick home games.
Yeah, you see back-to-back Central Division, but you also see back-to-back games. After hosting Seattle, you're forced to go into Winnipeg, on a night, and it's already off the bat, just like that. Welcome back to the season. You're heading into Winnipeg, which, oh man, the Central Division this year is going to be so competitive. There's a lot of questions already. We got the front runners like Dallas and Colorado and those type of teams. Nashville, even just on paper, phenomenal. But then you got these teams, you got Winnipeg, St. Louis, Utah, all the teams that can easily make the playoffs. And this is where it starts right here. You got to come out strong against the Winnipeg Jets, man. insane that you're already on the road against these two Central Division opponents. I mean, even in St. Louis, where the Wild have struggled in the Enterprise Center. Wait, do they still call it that? Hopefully they do. Over in St. Louis, where I swear I've been to the last like 5 Blues Wild games in St. Louis, and I think the Wild have won one of them. It's been that type of narrative in St. Louis, but also in Winnipeg. It's an easy arena to struggle in. Those fans are getting rowdy. It's that type of year. Like, it's the month. It's the opening month. Everybody's rowdy. And you're forced to go away. It's tough, and especially the 2 Central Division teams to start off the road trip. Man, it's going to be grueling, and it's going to be a lot. It's going to be really physical. Oh my gosh, Winnipeg. Let's just remember all the injuries we faced in the last couple of years from them too. It's like, man, it's tough, but here we go. This is it, right? Let's go.
It's go time. I will say something that I'm sure Wild fans are semi-relieved to hear is known hitter, not known skater, Logan Stanley is starting the year on injured reserve for the Winnipeg Jets. And so unless somebody else is going to step up and do it, I would probably guess that Kirill Kaprizov is not going to get injured in like a 3rd straight game at Winnipeg.
Knock on wood, please. Right.
Yeah, my desk.
Let's
gorgeous.
We just got to hope that, the year starts off well. I mean, obviously no injuries for the Wild, but for obviously our opponents as well. We got to start off strong here. And, it's so critical to stay healthy in this first month.
Yeah. And after Winnipeg, St. Louis, you head to Columbus again for a game on the road. After that, an interesting swing out there on the East Coast, especially with hurricane season in full force, at Florida, at Tampa Bay, at Philly, at Pittsburgh to finish off the month. And so you get the 2 Florida teams who are tough as ever. Philadelphia is in a similar situation to where the Minnesota Wild are at. They're trying to get back into the postseason conversation. And it just seems like Pittsburgh is kind of clinging to dear life with Sidney Crosby and trying to build around him to potentially get back to the playoffs as well. I'll just lay it out like this, and then we'll get your thoughts, Zach, on the 7 road games. I feel like in order to, if you stack together the tough ones on the road, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Florida, Tampa Bay, if you're going to be a playoff team this year, I feel like you got to win 2 of those. It's going to be tough to do, but I feel like if you are going to be a playoff team, you got to win 2 of those games. And you can't really afford any slips like against Columbus. And I would say, Philadelphia was a team that the Wild struggled with last year, but a team that I think if they are again, and whether or not I think the Minnesota Wilds can get to the postseason is one thing, but if the team themselves thinks that they are going to be a playoff team this year, you got to win those types of games, and you have to find a way to at least split the season series against the teams in front of you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. One of the teams that I overlooked last year and that surprised me a lot were the Philadelphia Flyers. They caught me off guard. I think the Wild went to Philly early on last year around Halloween, I think it was. And am I correct there? And I think they lost, and it was not a fun game at all.
Yeah, they got carved in that game. It was 6-2.
Yep, just ridiculous. And that's a team you really can't look, especially on the East Coast trips. Those can really add up. I mean, none of those are gimme games at all. I mean, you got Sergei Bobrovsky, the Stanley Cup champions and the Florida Panthers. And then you also head over to Tampa. I feel like this is the first time in so long that the Wild have not had back-to-back games against Florida and Tampa. It's been insane. Like, I swear, if you go back and look at the previous schedules, almost every time the Wild go into Florida, it's always on a back-to-back.
Literally.
Tampa. So that's a pretty good sight to see right there. I think, the Tampa Bay Lightning are a beatable team. I think you can go in there and steal one from Tampa, and then you wheels up again all the way over to Philly. That's a huge game. That's like one of the biggest games of the month.
Yeah.
I think one of the best true colors games for the Wild is the 4th one against the Blues in St. Louis. That's a total true colors game a team that we match up with really well, who we always compete with points wise at the end of the year, it's always the Wild or the Blues looking to get into the the playoffs, excuse me. So that's like my big circle on the calendar is the Blues game. Also the Philadelphia Flyers game, because that's not a team you play really often. And I think if you can go in there, stun them at home, that would be a huge statement win for the Wild. And hey, none of these games are easy, but you got to go in, steal a couple, get gritty, super low scoring. You got to start off goalie wise strong. And I think if you start off with strong goalies, not a lot of goals, but you run away with these games, that's how you win the month of October.
Yeah, I love that assessment on the True Colors games, because those are the teams where you're at in the current pecking order. And the only way that you're going to get to the playoffs, if you believe that you're a playoff team, is by beating those teams. Like this was the story last year. This was why the Wild did not get into the postseason, is because they beat the teams that they were clearly better than, but they just, every time they got in a situation against a team in front of them, they only had one win against a team that was named Colorado, Dallas, Winnipeg, Nashville. One win against those teams last year.
Yeah, that stat alone tells you what that team was last year.
Yeah.
I do think this year it's going to be a little different. I'm way more optimistic this year's roster than I was last year. I think there's a lot more like visual, like, okay, I can see these lines solidifying. I can see that, there's no coaching change. You're starting off the year with just John Hines. There's a lot that this team can solidify with. And I think that, with that all taken care of, everything is like, hey, we're all here together. Let's figure this out. Hopefully no injuries, because that's also a huge factor as of last year. There's just nothing you can do there. But when you start off the year pretty healthy, you can really figure out these lines really well. And I think, hey, that'll lead to some success.
I sure hope so. Because contrary to what some may believe, and I do check, I do what is called social listening. I check Reddit and some of those other areas. So hello to Minnesota Wild Reddit. Thank you for the kind words. But also, I do enjoy watching this team have success. Like, I feel like I need to clarify that. I do enjoy watching this team win, because what happened last year, every time, and it wasn't just me, every time people got into the press box that we're covering, we kind of were looking around like, okay, what's going to happen tonight? Like, what's going to happen in this game? So I do enjoy seeing them have success, but this is going to be the theme. This is going to be the theme that we take for pretty much the whole season this year, is if you believe you're a playoff team, you need to do this. And we'll react to what they do or don't do all throughout the season. Now, I have an over-under set, and we'll talk about that and whether we think the Wild can hit that number, as well as predictions for the October Player of the Month. I'm going to keep much better track of this year, because last year we actually did pretty good, but we're going to track this. Like, we're going to track this with social graphics. We got the whole thing covered. So October Player of the Month predictions, over under, and final thoughts on the October schedule, all coming up as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Best of all, it doesn't even need to be a winner. $5, win or lose, gets you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So head to FanDuel.com right now to take advantage of this great deal. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We get a second episode coming up for you here later today. Zach and I are embarking on an adventure that we are going to be calling Market Movers. Yes, we're taking a stock market themed approach to the Minnesota Wild month by month. Just wait. This is going to be one. This is going to be one that I think will turn some heads. So we're excited for that. You can listen to that coming up just after lunch. But let's finish, Zach, with a look at the over/under that I have set. And so basically, how I'm going to do this, because I'm sure I could find it somewhere, but that would require some looking, and I like to just set the number myself.
Yeah, let's do the Locked On Wild number.
Yeah. The Locked On Wild over/under for the month of October is 4.5. 4.5 wins is the number. You look at the games that are winnable: Columbus, Seattle, St. Louis for sure, Philly, Pittsburgh. I would put those as the most winnable games of the month. That's 5 right there. But then you also have Winnipeg, Florida, Tampa Bay in there as well. And so of a total of 9 games in the month of October, if the Minnesota Wild win 5, they go 5-4, and they hit the over. So where are you at, Zach, with 4.5 as the official Locked On Wild over/under for the month of October? Do you think they go over that? Do you think they go under?
I want to reiterate what you said about last year. It was so easy to just be kind of pessimistic and with a lot of questions going in with every game. But this year, for me, it's much different. I'm like much more like vibey, like positive energy going around. I am going to take the over, and I think they're going to hit it convincingly. Here's my like reasoning. I think the crazy road trip of 7 games in 3 weeks, I think a lot of the players are going to get used to like what that feels like. I think at that point, you're just going to accept that this is what it is, and we're on the road, and we're just going to go play everywhere we can. And the home games are going to come back later. I believe that the Wild are going to hit over 4.5. I see Columbus and the Kraken, as must wins. I think you have to win both of those in order to hit the over. It's going to be very, very hard to win 5 games on the road, especially in October. I do see a sneaky win against the Blues here. They're obviously like a very good team. They've owned the Wild, but at what point do they lose one at home for once? Maybe it's me. Maybe it's like I'm not going to be there for the first time and whatever. So I'll take since I'm not there, they'll probably win. So I think you do steal one in Florida there. And I think you do beat Pittsburgh. This team's different. There's just a different energy that I have. I'll say that again. It's a new year. I mean, we've always been on the buyouts, so we got 2 more years of that. But now it just feels like that's kind of behind us. And now we can start to look forward to our prospects and what the future will look like with this team, because that's not a thing. That's not a narrative anymore after this year. So I think that, in order to start off the season well, you got to, just accept that you're on the road trip there. There's no like ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's inevitable. With the 3 goalies, though, I think it's going to be helpful to have those 3 goalies on that road trip. You never know what you're going to need. And I think that, if it does get, like hard and a heavy workload for these goaltenders, you can kind of switch them out and kind of experiment there. I think it'll be a fun month to do that with, especially on the road. So it's a very, very challenging month. And, if you do accept that you're on the road trip and you do get those reps in, I think the Wild can really bond together and figure out a way to get 5 wins. And I think that's extremely ideal and a great way to end the month.
If the Minnesota Wilds, again, if they want to be in that postseason narrative, 6 wins, I feel like is doable in October. You've got Columbus and Seattle, first 2, knock those down. Winnipeg and St. Louis, you win one of those 2. I feel like St. Louis is the more winnable of the 2.
Especially because the back-to-back, it's just tough too. You come from St. Paul up to Winnipeg. It's tough.
Yeah, and Winnipeg, Logan Stanley aside, that's a Winnipeg team that plays very physical and they've had the Wild's number for the last couple of seasons, and so that's a tough one. So 3-1 at that point, beat Columbus on the road. You really should. Like,
Yeah.
I know it's a road game, but again, it's a team that you should beat. So 4-1 at that point. If you split the Florida Tampa Bay games, you're 5-2. Philly and Pittsburgh split there 6-3. And that's just like right off the top of my head without any of the little minutia, as they say. So I think I'm going to take the over as well.
Yeah.
I would probably be more in the 5-win realm because I think, saying that a team should do all these things, they're probably not going to. But I feel like, considering how this season started last year, if you can be 500, slightly above 500, 5-4, 5-3-1, which is 5-4. I love when we get to this point in the year because you always get those people who are like, don't count the overtime losses as losses. You're 10 games over 500, even though you have 9 overtime losses. They're still losses. So I do that for our comment section because I know Trav is one of the ones who it's like nails on a chalkboard when broadcasters are like, a team is 28, 15, and 14, so they're 13 games over 500. It's like, no, they're not.
No, they're not.
Overtime losses are losses. You just get a point.
Trav.
Yeah, you just get a pity point. So 5-3-1, aka 5-4, I feel like is pretty doable, and I feel like that feels better than what we saw last year. So
yeah, you just got to set the precedent, for the year. You got a full healthy roster, and you just got to make with it what you can. And I think that it's going to be a tough October, a lot of road games, and you just gotta sneak away. Use the goaltending, sneak away, and run away because it's going to be tough. But it's probably the toughest month of the schedule, honestly. I haven't really looked that far ahead, but I can't imagine 3 weeks and 7 games on the road is one of the easier ones.
I'm sure we'll find some just massive disaster lurking in the schedule. Like, I haven't super looked into the schedule at all yet. I'm sure there's just a disaster class waiting to happen at some point during the schedule. I'm kind of looking, but oh God. April. Wait till we get to April.
Of course, like right around playoff push time.
I will just leave that as a tease, but wait until April, because guess what? April is East Coast month. So we'll see. But yeah, it's a 7-game road trip to start the season is daunting, to say the least. Now, let's finish with nominees for the October Player of the Month for Locked On Wild. And Zach, if you've got one ready, go ahead. Otherwise, I have what is going to be one that I think people will love.
I got one, and I'm not doing this just because of the name. I came up with it. I promise. That was my thing last year. It was to think of a name in a month. But this will be Brocktober 2.0. And I'm telling you, with Spurgeon back and with Brodin, I think this defensive core is going to be one of the best. They're going to start off together. Like, I've been waiting for Brock Faber to, finally find his, like, I'm him mark and start off this season on a high note. I think him with Spurgeon as well, this defense is going to thrive. And I think Brock Faber is going to be the essential backbone of this Minnesota Wild team. And, let's go. Like, I'm just like so pumped. I've been waiting for so long. Brock Faber, this is your team. This is your future. And it all starts now. And I think he's got what it takes to lead this team to success in the month of October. What about you?
Here I thought I was gonna get us started with a bombshell. Brock Faber was my pick too, and I think it is going to be the start of, and this will be one of my bold predictions for the season as it were. We'll talk more about this in our next episode. I think it's the start of a double-digit 65-point season for Brock Faber.
Yeah.
Mark that down.
I'm honestly not even disagreeing. That will happen. I am so high on Brock Faber this year. He's going to break records, and whatever record you can think of, it will be broken through him. And man, it's going to be a sweet year. I'm so happy the Wild have him for so long. Minnesota guy, God, it just feels so good just to have him solidified and through and done and no money. It's all just done now, and now it's his team.
Yeah, it's going to be a great Brocktober, and now that I put that out there, I'm going to have to go look at what the points records are for defensemen for a season, because it's probably in jeopardy this year. Yeah. But we'll see. I've got all of these written down. I have all of these predictions written down, so we will be able to revisit them in the month of November, see how we did. More importantly, see how the Minnesota Wild did. So that's our episode for today. Again, make sure to check out episode 2 coming later today, where we take a stock market approach to the Minnesota Wild. It's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday, every pre and post right here on Locked On Wild.